A wedding is supposed to be a fairy tale, a day of love, celebration and joy. But what happens when the fairy tale becomes a trial? This is the story of a bride who walked into her own wedding and was met not with open arms, but with whispers of judgment and looks of disdain. They saw her as unworthy, a simple girl who didn't belong in their world of luxury. But they had no idea who she really was, or the power she held in silence. Get ready, because you are about to see a humiliated bride become the undisputed queen of her own story. The California sun cast a golden glow over Napa Valley, illuminating the sprawling vineyards and manicured lawns of the exclusive Meadowlark Country Club. It was a setting ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a place where old money whispered and new money shouted. For Grace, it felt less like a dream venue and more like a beautiful crystal cage. As she stood in the bridal suite looking at her reflection, she felt a tremor of anxiety. Her dress, elegant in its simplicity, was a stark contrast to the opulence that surrounded her. It was a classic A-line gown, with delicate lace sleeves, lovingly chosen from a small boutique, not a famous designer showroom. It was perfect for her, but she knew that in the eyes of her new family, it would be seen as hopelessly plain. She was marrying Julian, a man she loved with all her heart, a kind and gentle soul who seemed blissfully unaware of the class divide that separated their families. But his family, the formidable Sterling clan of San Francisco, was acutely aware. They were a dynasty built on generations of inherited wealth, and they moved through the world with an unshakable sense of entitlement. From the moment Grace arrived, she could feel their judgment. Julian's mother, Catherine, a woman who looked as if she were carved from ice, greeted her with a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Grace, dear," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "you look lovely, so very natural." The compliment was a perfectly crafted insult, and Grace felt its sting. As she walked through the reception hall, a breathtaking space dripping with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with exotic flowers, she felt like an exhibit in a museum, a curiosity for the wealthy guests to observe. She was the girl from a working-class neighborhood in Oakland who had somehow managed to snag a Sterling, and they were all waiting to see if she would crack under the pressure. The ceremony was beautiful, a blur of heartfelt vows and promises of forever. For the few minutes she stood at the altar holding Julian's hands, Grace felt safe, as if their love created a bubble that no judgment could penetrate. But the moment they were pronounced husband and wife and walked back down the aisle, the bubble burst. The reception was where the Sterling family's campaign of quiet humiliation began in earnest. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, a series of small, sharp cuts designed to make her bleed without leaving a visible wound. As Grace and Julian made their way through the crowd, Catherine would introduce her son with effusive pride, and then, turning to Grace, would add with a slight, condescending tilt of her head, "And this is his bride, Grace." The omission of her new last name was subtle, but deliberate. It was a way of saying, "You are with him, but you are not one of us." The whispers followed her like a trail of venom. "The dress is sweet, I suppose, if you're into that minimalist look," one of Julian's aunts commented to another, just loud enough for Grace to overhear. "I heard her mother was a seamstress. Maybe she made it herself," the other replied, followed by a stifled laugh. Grace's mother had been a nurse who worked double shifts, and the memory of her mother's tired, loving hands made the insult burn even hotter. Grace tried to engage with Julian's relatives to find some common ground, but her efforts were met with polite disinterest. They would ask her about her life in Oakland with the same detached curiosity one might ask a zookeeper about a strange, exotic animal. When she mentioned her love for community gardening, a cousin of Julian's remarked, "Oh, how quaint. We have a team of landscapers for our gardens, of course." Every word was designed to highlight the chasm between their worlds, to reinforce the idea that she was an outsider, an imposter in their gilded cage. Julian, ever the peacemaker, seemed oblivious, happily accepting congratulations and pulling Grace along, his hand warm in hers, but his presence was not the shield she needed. She was on her own, and the night was just beginning. The true centerpiece of the Sterling family's assault came during the toasts. The clinking of forks against crystal glasses signaled the moment, and a hush fell over the opulent ballroom. Julian's father gave a brief, perfectly adequate speech. Then Catherine rose, a vision of icy elegance in her silver gown. She glided to the microphone, her posture impeccable, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. She began with a warm, practiced smile, speaking glowingly of her son's accomplishments. Then she turned her attention to Grace. "And to our new daughter-in-law, Grace," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt more like poison. "We welcome you." Doom. She paused, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the killing blow. It takes a very special kind of confidence for a young woman to step into a world so different from her own. And it takes a truly generous heart, like my son's, to look past such differences and follow his heart. The meaning was unmistakable. It was not a welcome. It was a public declaration of Grace's otherness, a framing of their marriage as an act of charity on Julian's part. A wave of uncomfortable, sycophantic laughter rippled through the tables of Sterling family friends. They were applauding Catherine's clever, cruel wit. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. The humiliation was absolute, a spotlight of shame shining directly on her. She looked at Julian, pleading with her eyes for him to say something, to defend her, but he was frozen, trapped between his loyalty to his wife and his lifelong fear of his mother. He just squeezed her hand under the table, a silent, inadequate apology. The gesture, meant to be comforting, only made her feel more alone. He was with her, but he wasn't with her. He would not fight for her. In that moment, the grand ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and laughing guests, felt like the loneliest place on earth. The toast was a crown of thorns, pressed upon her head for all to see. The true centerpiece of the Sterling family's assault, the moment designed for maximum impact, arrived with the clinking of forks against crystal glasses. A hush fell over the opulent ballroom as the best man, Julian's cousin, finished his brief generic speech. Then Catherine Sterling rose. She moved with the predatory grace of a panther, a vision of icy elegance in her silver floor-length gown. She glided to the microphone, her posture impeccable, a champagne flute held delicately between her long, manicured fingers. She began with a warm, practiced smile, speaking glowingly of her son's childhood, his academic achievements, and his promising career. It was a mother's loving tribute, perfectly calibrated to charm the audience. Then her gaze shifted, and she turned her attention to Grace. The smile remained, but it became a weapon. "And to our new daughter-in-law, Grace," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt more like poison, "we welcome you." She paused, a masterful orator, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the killing blow. It takes a very special kind of confidence for a young woman to step into a world so different from her own. A world of history, of legacy. The implication was clear. Grace had neither. "And it takes a truly generous heart like my son's," she continued, her eyes locking with Grace's, "to look past such vast differences and follow his heart, no matter the circumstances." The meaning was unmistakable, a public declaration of Grace's otherness. She wasn't just being welcomed, she was being defined as a project, a charity case, an act of Julian's benevolence. A wave of uncomfortable, sycophantic laughter rippled through the tables, filled with Sterling family friends. They were applauding Catherine's clever, cruel wit, participants in a public shaming, disguised as a celebration. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. The warmth of the room turned cold, and the glittering lights seemed to mock her. The humiliation was absolute, a spotlight of shame shining directly on her, pinning her to her seat. She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading for him to say something, to stand up, to defend the woman he had just vowed to protect. But he was frozen, his face pale, his knuckles white as he gripped his own champagne flute. He was trapped in a lifelong paralysis, caught between his genuine love for his wife and his deep-seated fear of his mother. He just squeezed her hand under the table, a silent, wholly inadequate apology. The gesture, meant to be comforting, felt like a betrayal. It confirmed he would not fight for her. In that moment, the grand ballroom, with its laughing guests and overflowing flowers, felt like the loneliest place on earth. The toast was a crown of thorns pressed upon her head for all to see, and she was forced to wear it with a smile. It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? To be made to feel small on a day that should be your biggest. If you've ever felt out of place or judged for who you are, and you're hoping Grace finds the strength to rise above this, show your support by hitting that like button. It's a small click, but it sends a message that stories of dignity and resilience matter. Devastated and fighting a losing battle against tears, Grace knew she had to escape. As soon as the toasts concluded and the orchestra swelled to fill the awkward silence, she leaned over to Julian and whispered a quick, choked excuse about needing some air. She slipped out of the ballroom through a heavy oak side door, the sound of forced merriment fading behind her. She found herself in a secluded garden, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight and lanterns strung between ancient oak trees. The cool night air was a welcome shock to her system, a blessed relief against her burning cheeks. She sank onto a cold stone bench, hidden from view behind a fragrant wall of climbing jasmine, and finally let the tears she had been holding back fall freely. They were hot, silent tears of shame, of anger, and of a profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't just Catherine's calculated cruelty that had broken her heart. It was Julian's silence. His inaction was a tacit agreement with his mother's venomous assessment that Grace was someone to be tolerated, an outsider who should be grateful for her seat at the table. His hand squeeze under the table wasn't a promise of us against the world. It was a plea for her to endure the humiliation quietly, to not make a scene. Was this her future? A lifetime of enduring these subtle but devastating cuts, of smiling politely while her spirit was slowly eroded. The thought was suffocating, a tightening band around her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small and utterly defeated, a stranger at her own wedding. As she sat there, crying in the fragrant darkness, a memory surfaced, as clear and vivid as the stars beginning to prick the Napa sky. It was a memory of her mother, years ago. Her mother, a first-generation immigrant, had come home from a long day of cleaning houses, her hands raw and her back aching. She had found a teenage Grace upset over being mocked at school for her second-hand clothes. Her mother hadn't offered platitudes. She had sat with Grace, her touch gentle despite the roughness of her hands, and said in her quiet, steady voice, "Gracie, listen to me. Never let anyone else's smallness make you feel small." Their words are a reflection of their own empty hearts, not your worth. Your worth comes from in here, she had said, tapping Grace's chest with a firm finger. It is made of something stronger than their money or their opinions. It is made of steel. Don't you ever forget that. The memory was a jolt of strength, a voice from the past that cut through the fog of her current despair. She was the daughter of a woman who had faced real hardship with unwavering dignity. She was not some fragile doll to be broken by the petty cruelties of the insecure and the rich. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, a new fire igniting in her chest. The shame began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She would not let them win. She would not spend her life as a victim. She took one more deep breath, the scent of jasmine filling her lungs, and stood up. She was going back into that ballroom, not as the humiliated bride, but as the woman her mother had raised her to be, a woman of steel. Grace walked back into the ballroom with a newfound composure. Her eyes were clear, her posture was straight, and the fragile, wounded look was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable strength. She took her seat next to Julian, who looked at her with worried eyes. "Are you okay?" he whispered. She simply gave him a small, enigmatic smile and said, "I'm fine." But she wasn't just fine, she was transformed. The humiliation had inadvertently given her a gift, clarity. She no longer cared about fitting in or being accepted by his family. She only cared about her own self-respect. As she sat there, observing the glittering crowd, another memory surfaced, this one more recent and far more potent. It was a memory of a meeting with a lawyer a few months after her mother's passing. They were settling her mother's modest estate, which consisted mostly of a small house and some savings. But there was something else, something Grace had almost forgotten because it seemed so abstract and insignificant at the time. Her mother, a woman who had scrimped and saved her entire life, had been persuaded by a kind young client whose house she cleaned, a tech enthusiast back in the early 2000s, to invest a small sum, just a few $1,000s, in his fledgling software startup. It was a risky bet, but her mother had believed in the young man's passion. She had tucked the stock certificates away in a safe deposit box and rarely spoke of them. After her death, the lawyer had transferred the portfolio to Grace's name. Grace, who knew little about the stock market, had filed the paperwork away, assuming it was a small, sentimental keepsake. The name of the company was Innovate Dynamics. In the years since, Innovate Dynamics had become a titan of Silicon Valley. It was a unicorn, a multi-billion-dollar corporation at the forefront of artificial intelligence, a company whose name was spoken with reverence in financial circles. A company that she knew the Sterling family themselves had recently tried and failed to acquire a significant stake in. The irony of the situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. Here she was, being scorned for her humble origins, while she was, in all likelihood, one of the most significant silent shareholders in one of the most valuable companies in the country. It's a stunning realization, isn't it? The moment you understand that the very thing people are judging you for is completely irrelevant. The world is full of hidden strengths and secret legacies. If you believe that a person's true worth is so much more than what people see on the surface, and if you're excited to see how Grace uses this incredible secret, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. You won't want to miss what happens next. A slow, calm smile spread across Grace's lips. It was not a smile of malice or revenge, but of profound, liberating clarity. The game they had been playing all night was one of social standing and perceived value, and she had just realized she held the winning hand. But how to play it? Her first instinct, a hot flush of anger, was to stand up and announce it, to shame them as they had shamed her. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a voice of dignity, not vengeance. To stoop to their level would be to lose the moral high ground. No, she would not play their game. She would play her own. She would not use her secret as a weapon of attack, but as a shield of undeniable strength. She would not seek to humiliate them, but simply to render their judgment of her completely and utterly irrelevant. She began to move with a new, quiet confidence. She was no longer the timid mouse trying to avoid the cats. She was a queen, observing the board, waiting for the perfect moment to make her move. She excused herself from the table again, but this time with a purpose. She found a quiet alcove and took out her phone. With a few quick taps, she accessed her online brokerage account, a place she rarely visited. She looked at the current valuation of her shares in Innovate Dynamics. The number that stared back at her was staggering, a figure with so many commas it seemed unreal. It was more than a fortune, it was a dynasty in its own right. She took a screenshot. Then, she did a quick search for a recent news article about the Sterling family's failed bid to invest in the company. She saved the link. Armed with this silent, digital proof, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She was no longer defined by their whispers or their condescending smiles. She was defined by her mother's legacy, a legacy of hard work, quiet wisdom, and a single, brilliant act of faith. She walked back into the ballroom, her head held high. She caught Catherine's eye across the room. Catherine gave her a look of pure disdain, a look that said, "You will never belong here." Grace simply smiled back, a calm, knowing smile that seemed to unnerve the older woman. The game was afoot, and Grace, the girl from Oakland, was about to make a move that would checkmate the queen of San Francisco society. She just needed to wait for the perfect opening. Grace's opportunity arrived during a natural lull in the evening's festivities. The band had just finished a set, and the guests were mingling, their conversations a low, pleasant hum beneath the glittering chandeliers. The master of ceremonies was about to announce the cutting of the cake when Grace saw her opening. With a poise that surprised even herself, she rose from her seat. She walked not to the MC, but directly to the small, unattended podium on the stage, where the microphone stood waiting. Her movement was so deliberate and unexpected that it drew immediate attention. A ripple of curiosity spread through the room. Conversations faltered, heads turned. What was the quiet, humiliated bride doing? Julian looked at her, his expression a mixture of panic and confusion. Catherine, who was holding court near the bar, narrowed her eyes, a look of sheer annoyance on her face. She clearly expected Grace to make some sort of embarrassing emotional scene. Grace reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the now silent ballroom. She looked out at the sea of faces, a collection of the most powerful and influential people in San Francisco. They were all staring at her, waiting. For a fleeting second, her heart hammered against her ribs, but she pushed the fear down, channeling her mother's quiet strength. She didn't grip the podium for support. She simply rested her hands lightly on its edges. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice calm, clear, and steady. It carried through the room with an authority no one had ever heard from her before. "I hope you are all enjoying this beautiful evening. I just wanted to take a moment to say a few words." She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that held no trace of the pain she had felt earlier. "First, I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate with Julian and me. It means the world to us." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before they settled on the Sterling family table. "I've heard a lot of talk tonight about my background, about the different world I come from, and it's true. My world is different." A tense silence fell. Catherine's smile was now a thin, hard line. She was bracing for tears or an angry outburst, but Grace gave her neither. "My world was shaped by a woman who taught me that your value isn't determined by the name you carry or the money in your bank account. It's determined by your character, your integrity, and the quiet dignity with which you treat others." The words were a gentle but direct rebuke, and several guests shifted uncomfortably, the memory of their own snide remarks suddenly fresh in their minds. Grace had captured the entire room. They were hanging on her every word, completely unaware that the true bombshell was yet to come. With the room held in a captive silence, Grace continued, her voice never wavering. "My mother was an immigrant. She worked cleaning houses for some of the wealthiest families in this very city. She taught me that there is no shame in hard work, only in looking down on those who do it." She looked directly at Catherine, her gaze level and unflinching. "She also taught me to be smart, to listen, and to have faith in people who have bold ideas." The tension in the room was now thick enough to cut with a knife. The guests were leaning forward, completely engrossed in this unexpected turn of events. Julian watched his wife with a look of pure awe, as if seeing her for the first time. "You see," Grace said, her tone becoming slightly more conversational, "one of the young men whose home my mother cleaned had a bold idea. He was building a small software company in his garage. He had passion and a brilliant vision, but no money. My mother, using the small savings she had painstakingly put aside, decided to have faith in him. She made a small investment. She let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final devastating blow. That small company, which she became a silent, early partner in, was called Innovate Dynamics. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Innovate Dynamics was not just a company, it was a legend, a tech unicorn that had revolutionized the AI industry. Its name was a byword for visionary success. Several prominent investors in the room who had tried and failed to get a piece of the company stared at her with their mouths agape. Catherine's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, had crumbled into a picture of slack-jawed disbelief. The color drained from her cheeks. Grace gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. "So when you speak of my different world, Catherine, perhaps you are right," she said, her voice still calm, but now resonating with undeniable power. "My world is one where we build value with foresight and integrity, not just inherit it. It's a world where a seamstress's daughter can be a major shareholder in the future, while others are still clinging to the past." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an entire social hierarchy being dismantled in real time by a woman in a simple lace dress. The silence in the ballroom was shattered, not by an outburst, but by a single, slow clap. It came from a corner table where Mr. Harrison, a notoriously shrewd and influential venture capitalist, was sitting. He rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on Grace with a look of profound respect, and continued to applaud. One by one, others joined him. The applause grew, not into the polite, obligatory clapping from before, but into a genuine, rolling ovation. It was a tribute to her audacity, her intelligence, and the sheer, stunning elegance with which she had just checkmated the most powerful family in the room. The power dynamic of the entire evening had been irrevocably altered. Guests who had previously ignored Grace were now desperately trying to catch her eye. Men who had whispered jokes about her now looked at her with a new, calculating admiration. She wasn't just Julian's simple bride anymore. She was a major player, a silent power broker in the most important industry in their city. Catherine Sterling remained frozen in her seat, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. She had been publicly outmaneuvered, her social currency rendered worthless in a matter of seconds. Her weapon, the snobbery of old money, was useless against the undeniable power of new, innovative wealth. She had tried to paint Grace as a commoner, and Grace had revealed herself to be royalty of a different, more modern, and far more valuable kind. Julian, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of terror and awe, finally broke free from his paralysis. He stood up, walked to the stage, and took Grace's hand. In front of everyone, he brought it to his lips and kissed it, a gesture of fealty and profound apology. "She is my wife," he said into the microphone, his voice shaking but clear. "And I have never been more proud." He then looked towards his mother, and for the first time in his life, there was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, profound disappointment. The shift was complete. Grace had not only claimed her own power, but she had also liberated her husband. Grace handled her newfound status with the same quiet dignity she had displayed under duress. She did not gloat. She did not press her advantage or seek to further humiliate Catherine. She didn't need to. Her victory was absolute, and its power lay in its gracefulness. As she and Julian descended from the stage, they were immediately surrounded by a crowd of well-wishers, but this time the congratulations were sincere. Mr. Harrison was the first to reach her. "That was the most impressive thing I've seen in a decade, young lady," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "If you ever decide to take a more active role in your portfolio, my door is always open." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of authentic celebration. The suffocating tension had vanished, replaced by a vibrant electric energy. Grace danced with her husband, laughed with the guests who now flocked to her side, and moved through her wedding reception not as an intruder, but as its undeniable center of gravity. She had walked into the evening as the girl they thought was unworthy. She would leave as the woman they would never forget. Her story would become a legend in San Francisco society, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and charity galas for years to come. It was the story of the quiet bride who had weathered a storm of insults and emerged a queen. Her power came not from the staggering number in her bank account, but from her refusal to let others define her worth. She had proven that integrity was its own form of currency, and that dignity was a jewel more precious than any sterling family heirloom. And as we leave Grace, finally enjoying the wedding she deserved, it's a powerful moment to reflect. How often do we judge people based on what we think we know about them? This story is a beautiful reminder that beneath the surface, everyone has a story, a hidden strength, a secret legacy. If you were inspired by Grace's incredible journey of drama and super-assume, let us know in the comments what part of her story resonated with you the most. Share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded of their own inner power, and be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Because in the end, the true queens of this world are not the ones who are born into a crown, but the ones who have the courage to forge their own.